The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending our iOS 8 Security Enhancements webinar. I'm Nathan Swaim, the president of ANRC, and one of my goals this year was to increase our public awareness into all the research we've been doing here in the cybersecurity arena. So next week, we have a mobile forensic cell tower tracking webinar, and next month, we're going to be hosting another malware webinar where we're showing the best practices of reverse engineering against the latest and greatest malware threats that are out there. So let us know if you'd like to be added to our webinar mailing list. We're going to be doing plenty of future events around a lot of things in cybersecurity if you're interested. So the goal of this webinar is to create awareness about what security enhancements have been achieved in iOS lately and what user best practices should be followed at work, home, and abroad. So before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ANRC and what we do here. ANRC is an advanced cybersecurity training, consulting, and solutions provider. So we offer about 40 cybersecurity training courses that are currently being used by the government as pipeline training to train their cyber analysts. Additionally, we do cyber threat assessments, consultations for Fortune 1000 companies, where we conduct intense security assessments to identify areas of concern. And then finally, we offer products and solutions, one of which might be interesting to you out there in the audience. It was showcased at DefCon 2 years ago. We call it MacoViz, and it's an online iOS binary disassembler that you can use through a browser, much like IDA Pro, if you're aware of that tool. But it's pretty cool because you can use it through a browser, and you don't have to do all the analysis on your local machine. So our speaker today is Remy Baumgarten. He is our lead cybersecurity engineer here at ANRC, and he's also developed both our iPhone and Android mobile security courses, which covers development, exploitation, and reversing on those two platforms. He's also the lead engineer and develops the MacoViz tool that I was just speaking about, and that's freely available in the public. You can search for him and DefCon, and you'll find the talk we gave 2 years ago. So just some general guidelines for you on the webinar. I'll be monitoring the chat window since we can't hear you out in the audience. So if you have any questions, just type them in the chat window or the questions window there that you have, and I'll either answer those questions for you or pass them off to Remy at key points in the presentation here. If we don't get to your question during the show, just rest assured we will answer all the questions we receive, and we'll email you those answers after the webinar. Additionally, you'll also have the chance to download the slides that we're showing here today, and I'm recording the broadcast as well, so you'll be able to download both of those. And again, I'll email everyone those out after the show here. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Remy and let him get started. Go ahead and take it away, Remy.
Hi, everybody. Hi, and welcome to ANRC's webinar on iOS security. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. My name is Remy Baumgarten, and I'm a lead security engineer at ANRC Services. We provide the best in cybersecurity consulting, training, and products. If you want more information, please visit our website. The link's at the bottom left corner, and you can learn about our services. As Nathan said, I am the course creator and instructor for our mobile class offerings, and really enjoyed to do research and development on various other projects I'm working on here. I've spoken at a number of conferences regarding mobile security, as well as demoing a free reverse engineering tool at DefCon that we created in-house at ANRC. Please feel free to also follow us on Twitter for the latest news, research, tool releases, and future webinars. If you have any questions during the talk, as Nathan said, please feel free to write your question in the chat box, and I'll be responding to it during our question and answer session at the end of the talk. Just one more slide about MacoViz. I highly recommend taking a look at this. It's a really interesting platform for the web. Basically, this tool allows you to dissect an iPhone or Mac binary and visually walk through the file. It also, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner image, locates potential security-related violations. So even if you're not an experienced reverse engineer, you could just pull down this tab and then find the locations in the code that might be interesting to you. The YouTube link is also located at the bottom of the page for the DefCon talk about MacoViz. And we will be posting these slides again, so if you'd like the link, just pull down the slides or ask me after the talk and I'll send you the YouTube link. So today's theme is basically about how you could best protect yourself in different environments, either at home, work, or abroad. This theme is tied into the whole talk while we're touching on different topics like iOS security, the current state of the jailbreak, MDM security solutions, and finally iOS backups and why they're important to protect. We'll also be covering a lot of topics today, so we won't get too deep into technical detail, but I'd be more than happy to answer any question or discuss questions you have after the talk, as technical as you want to get. Apple's done an outstanding job comparatively to other mobile operating systems that are popular. They built the iPhone to be secure from the get-go. However, as with all operating systems, humans created it, so there's going to inevitably be flaws. Over the years, these flaws have become increasingly harder to find and even harder to exploit. So in this part of the talk, I've provided 10 security tips to lock down your phone in order to prevent malicious code, adversaries, and snoops from looking at your personal or enterprise data. I've also added parentheses after each tip to include whether this tip is applicable to home, which will be denoted by parentheses H, work, W, or abroad in A. The first few tips should be familiar as they hold true to all operating systems. First, always make sure your phone's up to date. And second, simple 4-digit passcodes are not going to be sufficient. If an attacker could guess 4-digit passcodes at 12 per second, the entire space of 10,000 possible pins could be guessed in about 13 minutes, or 14 hours at the slower rate of 1 per every 5 seconds. The third tip is to never connect to a public wireless network, whether paid or free. This includes coffee shops, airports, hotels, and definitely security conferences. It is trivial to perform attacks against users on shared Wi-Fi networks. Fourth, when you go to other countries or if you're forced to use public Wi-Fi, use protection. Get a VPN that you trust. This will encrypt all your data from your phone to the VPN server. Some people, like my mom, always leave their screen on for reasons I don't understand. Setting an auto lock on a lower interval lessens the chances of data theft as it will lock and require a password or fingerprint after the interval expires. To prevent brute force guessing of passwords, I highly recommend you choose the erase data option. You'll find that in settings, which will wipe the data protection cryptographic key after 10 failed attempts. Just make sure you have a secure backup in case your kids get their hands on their phone. Crime statistics for iPhones have gone down since the introduction of Find My Phone, which allows you to remotely erase the phone in case it's stolen. The New York Attorney General actually said that New York reported that grand theft or grand larcenies, which is considered theft over $400, have decreased 29% of mid-2014. Robberies of iPhones have decreased 19%. Find My Phone has been credited to the decrease of theft by New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. An important thing to note that goes on behind the scenes is that the phone does not actually wipe itself. It simply deletes the data protection cryptographic key on the device, making the data permanently useless. Even if the phone is stolen and a fresh new operating system is installed, the thief will still be stuck in an activation screen. This effectively turns these stolen jail iPhones into expensive, useless bricks. Remember, you have to enable this feature in your iPhone preferences, and I highly recommend it. To access it, you simply log into iCloud.com from anywhere and locate and wipe the device. It is also recommended that you call authorities instead of approaching the thief for obvious reasons. The 8th security tip I have for you today is to use Apple's configurator tool, which is freely available in the App Store for your Mac. This tool allows you to set permissions and restriction for the use of your device. It also allows you to deploy pre-configured iPhones complete with applications and settings for your family or enterprise. However, if your phone is already connected at work for the use of other MDM services, please do not attempt to use this tool as it might be against your company's policy. Tip number 9 relates to those of you who are using an MDM provider at work or thinking about using one. MDM stands for Mobile Device Management. Besides the features already mentioned in Apple's configurator tool, MDM solutions also give you the ability to containerize sensitive material so no leakage of information is possible. That is theoretically. And the final tip, number 10, is to enable two-factor authentication. This is a new service Apple just started making available last week. It prevents unknown or new devices from logging into your Apple ID account to access basically all of your information, including your iCloud backups, text, images, and App Store purchases. I highly recommend enrolling in this program. I've tested it out for the last few days, and while it's somewhat annoying when you have multiple devices initially, it really helps protect your information against adversaries. To enroll in this, please visit the link at the bottom of the slide or search for two-factor authentication for Apple on Google. This is in response to an increase in iCloud attacks that include celebrity information being leaked due to easily accessible Apple ID passwords, not exploits. The next section here, we're going to talk about the improvements of iOS 8 compared to that of iOS 7. With the release of iOS 8, many bugs were patched, 53 of them in total. These bugs or vulnerabilities presented potential attack vectors that could allow the installation of malware or a stealing of information. If you have not upgraded to iOS 8 yet, then you may be still vulnerable to attacks. Enterprise environments should always keep their employees' phones up to date to prevent a potential breach, since Apple does not regularly protect older iOSs. If you are interested in the specific CVEs that were patched, please ask me after class and I can provide a detailed description of them. The vulnerabilities at a high level included remote code execution, WebKit exploits, that's what Safari is based on, ASLR bypasses, that's also a security mechanism to prevent exploits, and Wi-Fi password interception. Apple went beyond that and not only patched the known vulnerabilities, but also introduced better data protection. In iOS 7 and before, certain types of data were not even encrypted. That data that wasn't encrypted included text, emails, attachments, and more. However, the FBI and law enforcement said that Apple went too far and prevents them from acquiring their target's data. On a side note, when I was in Australia, I encountered a lot of law enforcement officers and forensic analysts who were asking me if there was a quicker way to get around going through Apple. They informed me that Apple is really slow and overburdened by these requests, and the data acquisition could take a long time. You may have heard these stories in the news lately. For example, the director of FBI and law enforcement have criticized Apple publicly for their push for end-user privacy against seizures. However, there's caveats behind this and workarounds. One of those caveats is the use of iCloud. If you read the quote really carefully in the first news article, Apple says, so it's not technically feasible for us to respond to government warrants for the extraction of this data from devices in their possession running iOS 8. That's the really important part there, from devices in their possession. However, many people store information on iCloud, including their iPhone backups. I'll get into detail what these backups contain in the last section of our talk, but also note that the phone or the backup doesn't need to be acquired, as telephone companies are much easier to get warrants for call logs and text messages. Also, on iCloud, Apple has the crypto key for the data that you store in the cloud, so that information isn't even private to you. iPhone data protection, or encryption, as I already mentioned, covers many more files than that of iOS 7. The contents of photos, messages, email, contacts, notes, iTunes contents, reminders, attachments, and call history are now encrypted using iPhone's encryption chip for power efficiency, minimization, and lower consumption. Apple has introduced a warning that allows you to select on your phone if you trust the device you're talking to. This is called device pairing or device trusting, and is a response to a technique used in my iPhone class and publicly available on the internet to extract files on the phone that should remain private. This attack, called the Evil Girlfriend attack, worked by monitoring the USB slot to see if an iPhone connected to it. When an iPhone was connected, the script would run and copy out critical files like sms.db, which is a SQLite database that stores your SMS messages, which I will show you in the demo today, application databases, and other private files. It would then push a malicious binary onto the device. In our iPhone class, we were able to create a hidden startup script that would call our binary periodically to exfiltrate information from the device to our own web server. This is no longer feasible with the introduction of device pairing and data encryption enabled. However, these requests for personal information, well, they still happen. Apple claims they do not have the encryption keys to bypass protection and thus cannot give law enforcement access to the data that they used to be able to get. Tim Cook said, "We have never worked with any government agency from any country to create a backdoor in any of our products or services. We have also never allowed access to our servers, and we never will." Tim Cook also said, unlike our competitors, Apple cannot bypass your passcode and therefore cannot get access to the data. Yes, this is all true if you're talking about the device itself, but this is definitely not true for iCloud. Just remember that. A little bit more information on these different types of device requests. This chart was acquired from Apple, and this is for a time period of 6 months between January 1st and June 30th, 2014. The chart depicts the total amount of law enforcement requests that Apple received during this time frame for different countries, with the USA being the highest. USA has a total of 4,132 device requests within those 6 months, totaling a total amount of 13,743 devices. So when they make these requests, there is about 4,000 actual device requests, but that included a grouping of over 13,000 devices. Only 3,431 of those device requests resulted in obtaining data, or about 83%. This is a little bit misleading, though, and I think the media has taken this a little out of perspective, since Apple states that 93% of those device requests were for stolen phones, while only 7% were actual data requests containing pictures, messages, locations, and email. In all, less than 0.00385% of customers that Apple have had data disclosed due to government information requests. This chart, though, is only limited to law enforcement requests and excludes federal requests. However, these requests for personal information still happen. One more slide. And okay. Speaking of forensic investigators, how many are listening to this right now? If you nodded, there are a few important things for you to realize for iOS 8. First, many of the old tools will still no longer work unless they were updated for iOS 8. This is because of the location data. The location of data has changed in iOS 8. Apple-owned applications like Messages and Safari are still going to be located in your /applications directory, but all the other applications that you download from the App Store or your B2B store are going to be in these new locations. No iPhone, or for that matter, smartphone talk is complete without the current state of the jailbreak. For those of you who are not familiar with what jailbreaking is a form of privilege escalation. In this case, it escalates from the user mobile, who has low privileges, to root, which has full privileges. This allows the user to gain full control over the operating system to modify it to his or her liking. In other words, jailbreaking is a process of removing restrictions on iOS through the use of software and hardware exploits. Such devices include the iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad, Apple TV, and pretty soon the Apple Watch, and even sooner perhaps the Apple autonomous vehicle. Yes, if you haven't heard, Apple is actually working on an Apple car. For iOS 8, 3 popular jailbreaks were released: TAG, Pangu, and PP jailbreak. Apple has since patched the vulnerabilities that allow these jailbreaks to work with the latest iOS release a few weeks ago, though. All jailbreaks, since the first version of iOS came out, use a similar methodology. They first find a sandbox vulnerability and write an exploit for it to break out of the jail that is enforced by the iOS kernel. This mechanism is called sandboxing, and there's a file called sandbox.kext, which stands for kernel extension, that controls this. The next step is to obtain code execution by exploiting a valid Apple-signed binary already on iOS itself. Once the code execution is obtained, the next step is to obtain root, or privilege access, by exploiting an Apple-owned daemon that already has root privileges. Finally, they patch the kernel so that this process does not have to be repeated each time the phone is rebooted. Usually, they also patch the code signing mechanism so that any code can run unsigned. This is typical because third-party apps that are installed after you jailbreak your phone are not going to be signed by Apple. This also brings up a good point as to why you should never jailbreak your personal phone. Do you really want unsigned code running on your phone that's not approved by Apple? Well, once you jailbreak, you open the doors for exploitation either at home, work, or abroad when you turn off the security mechanisms offered by Apple to protect you. Jailbreaks don't last forever, though. Once a new version of iOS comes out, they stop signing the old IPSW or software update. This prevents reverting to an old version of iOS to jailbreak the device. This is an important thing because an adversary would be able to downgrade your phone to jailbreak it and install malware without you realizing it. Furthermore, the most dangerous iOS malware is only limited to jailbroken phones. Jailbreaks are becoming even more complex. Typically, only one major jailbreak is released per major version of iOS. Sometimes the vulnerabilities are discovered in the developer preview of iOS. Other times, they are discovered in, for example, iOS 7 and held onto secretly for the release of iOS 8 with the hope that Apple does not find it. This technique allows the user to upgrade to the next version instead of being stuck in the previous major version. Pingu is an example of a current, albeit now useless since it was patched, jailbreak for iOS 8. This particular jailbreak used 4 CVEs chained together. This demonstrates that the complexity of jailbreaks is increasing as the cat and mouse games of Apple versus the jailbreak scene continues. If you want more detailed technical information about how this exploit works, please feel free to ask me during the question and answer session. Another popular jailbreak tool available for iOS 8 is Tag. This jailbreak used different vulnerabilities, 4 of them in total, to accomplish the same end goal. Pingu and Tag share the use of one exploit in particular relating to the kernel function that controls the light sensor on the iPhone. You may have heard me speaking about third-party apps. Well, when a jailbreak is completed, typically a third-party app store called Cydia is installed. Cydia contains apps and other modifications, as well as command-line software. The contents of this store are not screened well against malicious code and may be considered risky. If you are familiar with Debian, then you'll recognize that Cydia uses the apt or advanced package tool to install Debian files. While Apple may limit the use of certain functionality in iOS, Cydia allows you to install software that has full reign and control of the entire system you choose. In this section in iOS 8 jailbreaks, I'm going to talk about hardware hacks. I want to also briefly touch on the future of jailbreaks so that you can be aware of how to protect your information, whether you're at home, work, or abroad. The world of jailbreaks just became a lot more exciting with the reintroduction of the debug pin. The debug pin, which was only present in older iOS devices with the old 30-pin connector, that's the first image you see on the slide, allowed hardware hackers to obtain access to the kernel debug console. This made finding exploits much easier. I constructed one of these years ago, kind of similar to the picture you see at the bottom right. This basically allowed access via a serial console to a terminal on a computer. Up until a few weeks ago, this wasn't possible. That is until a guy named Ramtin Amin discovered a way to make it work again. Apple has a protection mechanism called MFI. This allows accessory developers to gain access to the phone via a licensed program. Ramtin was able to find a way around this protection and is going to be selling a special component he created to the public soon. More information about his special Lightning device is available on the website listed at the bottom of this slide. I will summarize how it was discovered for those of you who are curious, but I will not be diving into too much detail. Just like the 30-pin connector, we need access to the serial port, which is used for debugging. This connector is called the C10C connector. It's a special type of Lightning cable that you can get. You can't really buy it from Apple because, as previously mentioned, you need an MFI agreement with Apple to obtain one. So what Ramtin did was bypass this requirement by acquiring and reverse engineering another MFI chip that was publicly available to learn more about how it operates. This is an actual picture from his webpage of him doing the hardware hacking on his phone. Oops. Okay. After learning how to operate, he designed a board and put it all together. He then connected the phone and listened on the USB port to the lightning cable to obtain the serial kernel debug console, as you can see here. So what does this all mean? Basically, a whole new batch of jailbreaks are going to be coming soon. Up until now, jailbreak hackers like Tag and Pengu have tried to find alternative methods or using something called porting up from older 30-pin enabled devices running the iOS version that they wish to jailbreak. Basically what that means is they took an older device that had a 30-pin connector and installed a newer version of iOS on it in order to gain access to that debug console. The availability of the Lightning serial access means that more potential eyes on finding exploits for the future jailbreaks is possible now. So why do we care? Well, enterprises using MDM solutions to detect jailbreaks are going to become less and less effective. Individuals should be wary of where they plug their phone in, as backdoors can be injected, kind of similar to what we talked about with the evil girlfriend attack. This kind of leads us into the section about MDM. In this section, we discuss MDM for work briefly and hopefully leave you some food for thought. The entire idea of detecting jailbroken phones using MDM software is strictly a cat and mouse game. The jailbroken phone will always be one step ahead since they control the entire device and can tell the MDM software and the MDM server anything it wants to hear. You cannot effectively ask the phone if it's already rooted, whether it's compromised or not. The device is already not trusted. Apple, in fact, removed their jailbreak detection API for this very reason, yet MDM providers are still trying to do their best to detect this. This scenario is kind of similar to asking a thief to hold $10,000 for you. The exchange is just not trusted. In fact, there's even a tool that not only hooks application API calls for jailbreak detection, but hooks system calls as well to thwart the detection. The program that can do this is called XCon by New Important and Lunatic, and is available on the Cydia store for free, and is constantly being updated for iOS 8 and ARM64 support. The link is right here at the bottom of the page. Here's a list of what XCon is currently able to bypass. This chart actually changes frequently because of the quickness of the application developer to find another way to detect a jailbreak. And you can see a few here: AirWatch, Capital One, Good Enterprises, iBooks. These all use app-based checks to see if the phone is jailbroken and will not function correctly if it is. You will also notice that some apps, such as movie sites, check for jailbreak detection. This is typically not for your own safety, but is rather a function of their DRM policy, that is, to protect their content from being stolen. This is a quote, or kind of a mission statement from XCon. At first, the project aimed to patch applications on a per-app basis, but now uses lower-level hooks to cover any apps that attempt to use the same procedure. Even patching apps not explicitly reversed by the developers. Originally an open source project, it actually remains closed source now to discourage App Store developers from working around XCon hooks. The reason why they wanted to use lower level hooks, by the way, instead of app-based hooks is because they'll be able to cover more ground and more checks instead of patching an app, every time that it has to change. It's kind of more of a catch-all. There's some simple detections that apps actually use to detect the presence of a jailbreak. Some are very simple, like locating the jailbreak artifacts or trying to connect an existing service that only a jailbroken phone would have. The most popular techniques are listed right here. The first one is the existence of directories. So some apps like to look for certain paths, like /applications /cydia.app or private var stash, among a handful of others. And directory permissions, they check, basically, it's kind of similar to the first one, which is the existence of a directory, but it also checks the Unix file permissions of specific files. process forking is definitely not allowed in iOS. So by checking the return PID of a fork, or the process ID of a forked process, a rogue app can tell if it's successfully forked or not, at which point it can determine if the device's jailbreak status is actually jailbroken or not. Another one is SSH loopback connections. There's only a small number of applications that actually implement this protection mechanism, as it's not nearly as effective as the others. But due to the large portion of jailbroken devices that actually have OpenSSH installed, these applications will try to connect to localhost and port 22. Obviously, if there's a successful connection, it means that the phone is going to be jailbroken, since you're not allowed to have an SSH daemon running on an iPhone, unless, of course, it's jailbroken. The use of system functions is basically using the system function call with a null argument on a device that's in a jail will return a 0, but doing the same thing on a jailbroken device will return a 1. So that's a really simple check to check for. And then the last one is DYLD functions, which is the dynamic linker on iOS. It's by far the hardest to get around because when you patch something, the patches themselves are part of the dynamic libraries themselves. In this section, we're going to talk a little bit about CDS substrate hooking, which is something that you could do after the phone is jailbroken, whether intentionally or not intentionally. Basically, what this does is allows you to have full control over the operating system by redirecting the flow of function calls to your own code. Essentially, that's how XCon works. We're basically allowed to append or overwrite existing functions or methods by simply finding the method name in the headers and writing something called a tweak. And a tweak is basically your implementation of this API hooking. If that doesn't make too much sense, I'm going to give you a little demonstration / demo here in the form of slides. But for this example, what I did was change the slider name. We basically find the original parameter to the private method called setCustomSlide to unlock text. It takes one parameter, and then we call the original function using the %orig with our new argument. So in this code snippet here, all you need to look at is the fp8 variable called swipe_me. And I basically send that parameter to the original function, setCustomSlide to unlock text, and then I go ahead and compile it with something called Theos, which is a makefile system. There's a link here at the bottom as well. There's some great tutorials on Reddit, and there's a lot of other tutorials online that you could take a look at that are pretty straightforward. So you simply write your code, you run make package install, and what it will do is compile your tweak or your hook, and it will create a Debian installation package, and then it will connect to SSH over your Wi-Fi network to your phone and install that application. At that point, it will do something called respringing, which is basically restarting the front end of your phone. And when you do that, you could see that the phone now says swipe me instead of slide to unlock. You could take this as far as you want. Basically, all you need to do is take any method that an application calls, hook it, change what you want to, and then the process will continue running. And you could do that with pretty much anything on the system. The same method can be used to trick any application to do basically anything you want. And this includes bank applications, definitely MDM solutions, email clients. These are all at risk to this type of attack. And again, a jailbreak doesn't have to be, something that you plug into your computer and set your iPhone up to, become in a certain mode and run through the whole entire GUI interface. These jailbreaks could be repurposed to be drive-by exploits, depending on the type of payload they have. And there's a whole other area of nefarious ways to get into the iPhone that doesn't require user interaction. And basically, with these MDM solutions, only a single jailbroken device is needed to compromise the integrity of an entire enterprise MDM solution. If you think about it, one rogue phone on the network could be doing anything it wants to do. So far, we've covered how to protect your device, but what about your device backup? Well, there are two kinds of backups. The first being your backup that you create with iTunes that backs up the contents of your phone to your computer's hard drive. There's an option in iTunes that allows you to crypt with a password as well. Really, you should do this. If you don't do it, all your information is vulnerable if your computer is attacked. So it doesn't matter how much you protect your phone. If you're not protecting your computer as well in that backup, it's going to be worth nothing. The second type of backup is an iCloud backup. As I previously mentioned, an iCloud backup is accessible to anyone who has the Apple ID username and password. So you may be wondering, what does an iPhone backup look like? How do I read it? And what kind of tools do I need to view it? Well, I'm going to cover all that, but first, before we get into those details, let me familiarize you with where an iCloud backup is enabled on your device in case you're curious. You could see in this right here, you'd click Settings on your iPhone screen, and then you'd scroll down to iCloud, and then go over to Storage and Backup, and then turn on your iCloud backup, and then click Backup Now. In order to extract the data from your iCloud backup, you'll need a tool. One that I found, it is shareware, and there's a few Python scripts out there that will do the same thing. But for this, I chose this shareware program. With both versions of backing up, both iCloud and computer backups could become readable using this type of tool. This one in particular does the iCloud backup and the local backup, even if it's encrypted. Of course, you need the password unless you're going to be brute forcing it. You will need an Apple ID and password to get a copy of the backup using this tool, so that's something to be aware of. And this program, again, works for those locally encrypted backups, and if you're curious, those backups are using AES 256. So right now, I'll show you a little bit of a little demo after this, but when you actually do run that backup on your computer, or into iCloud for that matter, without a conversion utility like the backup extractor or a freely available Python script, you're basically going to end up with all the files, and that's in a location on your OS X in library application support, mobile sync backup. But those file names are going to be unreadable as they're just hashes. So once you extract the backup, you have access to the most of the files on the iPhone, excluding system resources and excluding any Cydia applications that you've installed. If you want to see the backups of all your Cydia applications, you're going to have to download a Cydia backup application from the Cydia App Store. All these backups basically are backed up to a folder name that corresponds to a unique identifier of the device for the full backup. The differential backup has the same folder name, but it will be appended with a dash and the ISO date of the backup. So that'd be like 8 digits. And the dash and the time in 24-hour format with seconds.
Hey, Remy.
So each backup's going to have these 4 files, info plist, manifest plist, and status.plist.
Hey, Remy.
Yeah.
Got a quick question from the crowd here. They're asking, can we back up or copy all the profiles on the device?
All the profiles?
Yeah, if you've got more than one profile on the device, can you back up the different profiles?
I'm not sure what you mean by profiles. In iOS, there's only a single user that's allowed. What profiles are you referring to?
All right, we'll get back to you. Go ahead.
Okay. The file names are basically made up of SHA-1 hash of their name together with their path and domain. This is a little example here. In the first picture, you basically could see that all these directories in my backup directory are different backups for the device. Basically what happens is you have a SHA-1 function that takes your home domain and then the dash library, which is the path. The path is library SMS, sms.db, and you take that and you get a SHA. So that's basically all those different hashes you're looking at in the backup directory right there. There's also some really good goodies in the backup file that you could extract and take a look at as long as it's decrypted. One of them being the messages, which is sms.db. And what you would do is you'd open up all these database files that you'll find in the backups, and there's tons of them. There's SQLite databases for pretty much everything, call history, SMS, and then there's plist for bookmarks and other types of settings. So basically, we could open up that database in something called an SQLite viewer. There's one that's available for Firefox that's free. I'll show you where to get that here soon shortly. And when you have that, you could see these text messages right here. There's also location information. And basically what happens is iOS collects longitude and latitude coordinates of local Wi-Fi networks while you use your phone. This information is sent to Apple every single day to build and update its geolocation database. This provides end users with quicker and more efficient lookups of your current location instead of relying on the GPS, which is very power intensive. In other words, when you check your location, it finds cell towers and Wi-Fi networks around you to pinpoint and triangulate your approximate location. However, this could be used for nefarious purposes. Imagine a scenario where a backup is stolen and the adversary wants to know where you've been in the last few weeks. The adversary just needs to extract the longitude and latitude coordinates and upload them to Google Maps or a site like this one, Batch Geo, to map out the whereabouts of the user. Using this map, you could see that the person being tracked was most likely visiting certain cities and perhaps even traveled by aircraft. You can infer this by the lack of markers along the route. Furthermore, all the images that were taken by the camera, which are also stored in the backup, contain geolocation information. So by combining the photos and geolocations, you can map out which pictures from the backup were taken in what locations and have them presented to you in an interactive map. It's pretty cool, huh? So there's some other stuff that you can find in the backup file. I want to leave this to you guys to explore on your own. If you do have an iPhone, it's definitely backed up, and I definitely recommend you trying one of these tools. I'll give you a really brief walkthrough of how to use the tool. It's really, really simple though. So definitely, take a look where your keychain is, your application data, which contains, your database, preferences, usernames, and other files, and the call history, your bookmarks and history, your email, and more. So basically, this is just like a brief, up-to-date news section on, iOS. For our class that we offer, it's 80% labs, 20% lectures using real-world applications and exploits. It's also 5 days long. All the laptops and the iPhones are provided during the class for each student. The mobile classes are right now Android and iOS. In this example, for the iPhone class, we cover deep dive on the iPhone architecture and design, Objective-C development, Mako file format. We also use MakoViz to help you out and assist you with walking through and visually seeing how the file format works. We also talk about forensics. We have a whole day on ARM architecture and then programming in ARM assembly. We also do decompiling and reverse engineering of iOS binaries to find certain threats. We also talk about iOS security. We do a lot of labs with runtime injection, harvesting geolocation data, hands-on jailbreaking labs, and then we also have remote mining of data on iOS devices. So before I get into the quick demo, I'd like to open it up to questions.
The only thing going on right now, Remy, is the talk about the profiles, and we're still unclear about app profiles or user profiles. So other than that, we're good to go, I think.
Okay. Maybe you could open up the discussion on chat, and I could ask a few questions. Or
okay. I do have another question. Has Remy ever talked to Black Bag?
Black Bag. I've never heard of Black Bag.
Okay.
Is that a organization or a tool, or
yeah, I think so. All right, we'll go ahead and with the demo, and I'll keep queuing these up.
Okay. So just briefly, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like. Could you see my screen okay?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. So on the left here, this is an actual backup that's located, this will be on your Windows computer or your Mac computer, and this contains all those hashes that I told you about. And this is the main reason why we need a tool like this backup extractor right here. There's also those files I mentioned earlier: info plist, manifest plist, status plist. I recommend taking a look at those when you get a chance. And you can see all these files. They're basically, the system doesn't even know what these are. So after we actually do the extraction of this data, we are presented with this directory, which contains, human readable forms of all these hashes, as well as directories and so forth. I'm not going to be digging into too much of my personal information here, since this is my iPhone, but I will show you what something like the SMS database looks like, SMSDB. This is another backup I have right here, and basically I just found the SMS database and I threw it into this SQLite Manager, which is a free extension for Firefox, and you can see the text message I have right here under the message table. So this one's Hi iOS webinar. So I highly recommend you taking a look at some of these tools and playing with the backups, and definitely enable the encryption on your local computer. Any other questions?
Yeah, we got some questions coming in. One of the questions is this based on iTunes multiple profiles? So one of the audience members had a previous iPhone, and she installed a profile for her son, and so I guess she's asking, can you look at the backups for multiple profiles if they have it on the phone?
Are you referring to like logging with a different Apple ID? Because sometimes when you give your Apple ID to your son to log on and download his music or use his apps, that kind of stuff is it's all going to be stored in the same backup. And it's going to be basically, if you download an application using your Apple ID or your son's Apple ID, essentially what happens is that application is going to be signed by Apple specifically for that Apple ID. So any user that downloads that app and is logged in under that Apple ID is going to have access to that application. All that information is going to be stored in the same backup file. But as far as I'm aware, iPhone does not have multiple user accounts. It's meant for a single user. That's why iPad doesn't have a login screen that allows multiple users to log in. Apple's kind of methodology or ideology is that everybody should have their own personal device and you shouldn't share the device.
Okay, go ahead with the demo.
But that was the demo.
Oh, okay, already done. All right, so is that it? Are we all done?
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email is remy@anrcservices.com, and please feel free to check our website out for, all the different classes, and subscribe to our Twitter feed.
Okay, well, excellent information, Remy. Thanks for attending our webinar today, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and found some of the information useful. Again, I'll be emailing you all with links to the slides and the recorded broadcast, so you can download that if you want. And of course, we encourage you to send follow-up questions. We'll look at some of the questions that came in and make sure we respond accordingly and get the right context in place. It's kind of a little bit kludgy with me running the text and Remy having to talk. So we'll get back to those that we didn't fully answer. So thanks for your time. There'll be a short little 3-question survey when you close out the session. So we encourage you to fill that out so we can improve our webinar in the future. And with that, we say take care and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.